My wife is cheating on me with my stepbrother and gets pregnant. But when I ask for a paternity test, she terminates the pregnancy. Now it's time for her conservative parents to find out. I'm 34 years old and I've been married to my 29-year-old wife for 2 years. Our relationship has been fairly standard. We met at a work event many years ago. We were friends for a couple of years before realizing we both felt something more and started dating. We dated for 3 years before I proposed, so we've been together for almost 6 years. We didn't really have any complications during our dating phase or after getting married. She is beautiful, smart, and a great partner for me. I've tried to be a good husband to her and we've been happy together. About 6 months ago, my stepbrother Darren, who is 28, got fired from his job. Instead of looking for another job, he decided to take some time to travel and find himself. Darren has always been unpredictable and spontaneous. It was a lot of work to convince him to go to college and get a degree. He always has crazy ideas that we have to talk him out of, but getting fired for being intoxicated at a work meeting is serious. Despite his track record, he also decided to quit drinking. While I feared this might just be another thing he'd abandon halfway through, I tried to be supportive for my dad's sake. My parents divorced when I was a child, and my dad married Darren's mom when I was a teenager. So when Darren asked to stay at my place for a few weeks to explore New York, I didn't know how to say no. I was skeptical and not really willing to do it, but my parents asked me to let him stay, and I couldn't refuse. I asked my wife, and she said it was fine, so I finally gave in. He came to live with us 2 months ago. I made it clear that he couldn't bring anyone over to the apartment, and while he could come and go as he pleased, he shouldn't interrupt our sleep. Surprisingly, he agreed to all my rules for the first few days. He stayed out almost all night, and I saw him come back as late as 7 in the morning when I was already up and getting ready for work. Aside from that, he was pretty kind, had dinner with my wife and me at our place, and even cooked for us a few times. I was pleasantly surprised. This wasn't the Darren I had known my whole life. My wife and I had planned a weekend trip to Las Vegas during his second weekend with us since I had worked there. We told Darren to take care of the place until we got back. Everything was set, but at the last minute, my wife got seriously ill on Thursday night and we were supposed to leave the next morning. We were both really upset but still thought she might go if she felt better by the morning. Unfortunately, she only seemed to get worse, and by the time we were supposed to leave, she was too sick to go. I tried to reschedule my work and postpone our trip, but it was too late, so I had to leave. I felt terrible leaving her in that condition, but I knew at least Darren would be there in case her health worsened. He promised to stay home and prepare her homemade meals as well. I promised to return early Saturday morning and left. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't see what was about to happen. So, I went to Las Vegas alone, came back the next day, and saw that my wife was feeling better. I didn't think much of it, but after that weekend, I noticed Darren was at home more often than before. He used to go out every day, but he didn't leave for several days in a row. I asked him if everything was okay, and he just shrugged, saying he was trying to save money. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I started noticing other things that caught my attention. One day, I came home from work and saw that my wife was already home. Apparently, she had taken half the day off because she had a headache and forgot to tell me. Another time, I came home early from work and saw Darren and my wife entering the house together. Apparently, they had run into each other outside the building. It could have been a coincidence, but I had a bad feeling about it. I had never doubted my wife's faithfulness, and while Darren was messy, I didn't think he could do something so horrible. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew I couldn't accuse them of anything without proof. Not only did I have no evidence, but it would also cause incredible chaos in my family that I simply didn't want to deal with. So, I did the simplest thing possible. I asked Darren how long he planned to stay with us. I told him it had been great having him around, but maybe he should start thinking about his next steps. Fortunately, he got the hint and said he'd move out within the week. My wife was in the room while I had this conversation, and she just stayed quiet. She didn't say a word. I didn't like that. Anyway, Darren moved out, and I tried not to dwell on my doubts and instead focus on my marriage. Once Darren moved out, things were fine, and I almost started believing I was just being paranoid and that none of that had happened. I felt ashamed for thinking my wife could do something like that when she had been the perfect partner for me all these years. But then something happened 2 weeks ago. We found out my wife was pregnant. 2 months pregnant, to be exact. You can probably see where this is going. 2 months ago, Darren was living with us. I felt sick to my stomach. Let me give you some context. I'm a few years older than my wife, as I mentioned. I was ready to settle down and start a family of my own by the time I was 30. When my wife and I started dating, I knew right away she was the one for me, and I wanted to marry her. But she felt she was too young to have kids and wanted to wait a few years before taking that step. I supported her decision, though it wasn't what I wanted. We decided to wait until she was 30 to start trying for kids. So, we always use protection. My wife doesn't take any pills because her body reacts badly to hormonal contraceptives, so she always insists that we be extra careful, and I always use protection. Of course, accidents happen, but I just couldn't get over the feeling that something was wrong. The timing was simply unsettling for me. She said she wanted to have the baby. She said that although it was unexpected, it was a good thing, and that we should be happy about it. I've wanted kids for a long time, so under different circumstances, I'd be over the moon. But I was in complete agony. I tried to look happy in front of my wife, but I don't think I've ever felt worse. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't talk to any of my friends about it because I didn't want anyone to judge me, but I just couldn't shake the negative thoughts and feelings. After about a week of living in complete agony, I realized I couldn't go on like this. I had to confront my wife. I knew this could have a disastrous impact on our marriage and that if I was wrong, she might never forgive me. But I couldn't stop thinking about the worst-case scenario, and the possibility that she might be pregnant with my own stepbrother's baby made me nauseous. We went to our first appointment and did some tests and blood work, but I felt like a complete mess and couldn't handle it. So I prepared for the worst and decided to talk to her. About a week ago, during dinner, I told her I needed to talk about something very important. She wanted to know immediately what it was about. I was terrified, but I tried to be as direct as possible. I told her I was sorry for feeling this way, but I asked if the baby she was carrying was really mine. She seemed shocked by my question. Her entire face turned red, and she started yelling, saying I was a monster for accusing her of something so horrible and that she had always been faithful. She asked where this was coming from, and I told her it was too much of a coincidence that she was 2 months pregnant right after Darren moved out 2 months ago. This made her even angrier, and she started yelling louder. I saw the situation was getting out of hand, and I tried my best to calm her down and get her to listen. I explained that it was painful to live with these doubts, that I wished I didn't have them, and I told her about the things that had happened during Darren's stay that made me feel something was wrong. She seemed to calm down a bit and said she understood why I had doubts, but she needed me to trust her and our marriage. I felt terrible, but I told her I wished I could erase these thoughts and that if there really was nothing to worry about, I wanted a paternity test after the baby was born. I even apologized and told her I understood this must be hard for her, but I needed to be sure for my own peace of mind. Of course, I didn't expect her to fully agree with this, and I prepared for some resistance, but her reaction was incredible. If she was agitated before, mentioning the paternity test made her lose it completely. She told me I was cruel, and she couldn't believe I was putting her through something so humiliating just because of my crazy thoughts. I tried to stay calm, but honestly, seeing her so against it only made me feel my doubts were justified, and I got angry. I told her this was an ultimatum, and that if she didn't agree, I didn't think we could stay together. This seemed to calm her down a little, and she said she needed time to think about it. That night, we slept in separate rooms. The next morning, we didn't say a word to each other and went to work. I spent the whole day at work thinking about what had happened, imagining the worst possible scenario. The rest of the week went like this. She came home late every night and refused to talk to me. Every time I tried to talk to her, she got very agitated, so I stopped trying. I didn't know she was planning her next move. Last Thursday, I woke up in the morning and realized she hadn't come home the night before. I sent her several text messages, but she didn't respond. I had to go to work, but I was so distressed I left early and went home. I spent hours waiting for her to come back. But when it was past PM and she still wasn't answering my calls, I got very worried about her. I didn't know what else to do, so I called her assistant at work to ask if she was there. To my surprise, I learned she had taken 2 personal days and hadn't gone to work. Her assistant seemed surprised that I didn't know this. At that point, I was extremely worried and called some of her friends to ask if she was with any of them. When they all told me they hadn't heard from her, I started imagining the worst. I feared something had happened to her, or that she had left me as a last resort. I called my mother-in-law to ask if she was with them. She wasn't. But my mother-in-law became very concerned when she heard my wife was missing. She said she would try to contact her and let me know if she heard anything. We decided to call 911 if she remained unreachable. I spent the next half hour in absolute panic, but then I received a call from my wife. She told me she was perfectly fine and just needed time to sort some things out, and that I shouldn't have involved her mother and stressed her out unnecessarily. She sounded completely indifferent and even annoyed, showing no concern about the stress she was causing me. I tried to keep calm and asked her where she was and when she would come back. She said she would return the next morning and hung up. I went to bed frustrated and deeply upset. I even considered taking some time apart, but I didn't know what was coming. She woke me up the next morning and seemed unusually happy. I asked her where she had been the day before, and she said she had been resolving an issue. What she said next was more shocking than I could have imagined. And believe me when I say I had spent weeks thinking about everything that could go wrong. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said that this pregnancy was planting stupid doubts in my mind and destroying our marriage. So she decided to save our marriage and had an abortion. She looked me straight in the eyes and said that now there was no reason for me to doubt her loyalty and we could have a fresh start for our marriage. I was stunned. I just stared at her and asked if she was joking, and she said she was completely serious and hoped I could now relax and stop letting stupid doubts bother me. That was my breaking point. I looked at her for a few more minutes, got up, and walked out. I was afraid I would have a mental breakdown if I spent another second in her presence. She started to follow me, but I told her to stay away from me if she didn't want trouble. I guess my tone was serious enough to stop her. As I left the building, I called my lawyer and told him I was divorcing my wife and needed him to start the paperwork immediately. I told him we needed to ensure she didn't get a single cent of my money, and I scheduled a meeting for the next morning. I didn't know exactly how things would play out, but I knew what I had to do. I called Darren and asked where he was. He said he was somewhere in Atlanta. I told him I was divorcing my wife and asked him to stop wasting my time and just admit they had been together. He was silent for a few minutes and then simply apologized. That was enough for me. I knew there was nothing more to say. I checked into a hotel that night and prepared myself for everything I knew would come my way. The next morning, I got up and went straight to my lawyer, giving him all the details. The adultery, the abortion, the whole package. He told me that while it's hard to get a clean divorce without alimony unless both parties reach a mutual understanding, since my wife has a well-paying job and is clearly at fault here, we had a shot. Honestly, I didn't care about the money, it was more about the principle. I was done with this woman. I couldn't believe how cold she could be. It was like I had spent all these years with a stranger. The person I married and loved wouldn't have been capable of doing something so insane. I know she was with my stepbrother, but there was still a chance she had been pregnant with my child, and now we'll never know. After almost 6 years in this relationship, changing my plans to accommodate her wishes and doing everything I could to be a good husband, this is what I got. I called her assistant and asked if she was at work, and she was. I asked her not to tell my wife I had called, lying and saying I was planning a surprise for her. Then I went home, packed as many of her things as I could into 3 suitcases, and left them in the hallway. The next step was calling a locksmith and changing the locks. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want her in my house. Then I packed some of my things into an overnight bag and went back to my hotel because I didn't want to be home when she returned. By the time I finished everything, it was almost 5, and I was physically and mentally exhausted. As soon as I got to my hotel, I lay down on the bed and fell asleep. I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my wife, of course, but I decided to give her the same silent treatment she gave me the day she had the abortion behind my back. She kept calling, and there were a million messages I didn't even bother to read. As far as I was concerned, she had nothing to say to me. After almost an hour of her calling non-stop, she finally stopped. I thought she had given up, but then I got a message from Darren, saying she had reached out to him asking if I had spoken to him. He told her everything was over and that I knew everything. He apologized again via text, but I couldn't care less about that. I didn't reply to him either, and I was thinking about what to do next. The next step is where I think I may have gone too far, but I was heartbroken and humiliated. Something you should know about my wife is that she comes from a very conservative Southern family. They do things a certain way there, and they had been pressuring her to have kids since the moment we got married. For years, I supported her at every family event when the topic of taking our time came up. I never revealed that the only reason we weren't trying for kids was because she wanted to wait. I knew if they found out she had cheated and had an abortion, it wouldn't be very pleasant for her. So I decided to be petty for once in my life and called my mother-in-law. I calmly explained everything to her and told her I was divorcing her daughter for violating my trust. She sounded shocked and didn't believe me. I told her Darren had already admitted to the affair and that as for the abortion, I could show her the positive pregnancy test and medical reports from our first visit. The rest, she could ask her daughter to explain. I expected a reaction from my wife soon, and sure enough, my phone was flooded with calls from her. I tried ignoring her, but after an hour and a half of relentless calls, I finally answered. Her reaction was as expected. She was beyond furious and said I was ruining her life for no reason, and that she had nowhere to stay the night. I ignored her attempts to provoke me, and told her she could check into any hotel of her choice and not to bother me. I told her she would be hearing from my lawyer soon, and that any communication from now on would be through our lawyers. I also told her I'd pack the rest of her things and deliver them wherever she wanted. She told me her parents were furious with her, and that she was no longer welcome in their family. She added that I could forget about her inheriting a penny from them. This even surprised my in-laws. I expected them to be angry but didn't anticipate something so drastic. Obviously, I didn't tell my wife about this. I simply replied that she should have thought of that before acting behind my back, and that what her parents did was none of my business. She said I was immature and petty and that I shouldn't have involved her parents in our marital issues because now her life was ruined, and she had no one. I replied that I didn't care what she thought, and I hung up. She kept sending me a million messages, calling me every name under the sun and saying she would take every penny I had and make me regret this. I also got a call from my father-in-law. He said he was ashamed of his daughter and apologized for what she did. He told me they were tired of letting her get away with things, and they hoped this would teach her a lesson. He asked me for the OBGYN reports, which I was happy to share. It's been a few hours since then, and my wife is still messaging me. I'm considering blocking her, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I have this nagging voice telling me I went too far and should have kept this between the two of us. I don't regret kicking her out of my apartment, and I have no doubts about the divorce, but I know how hard it must be for her to be cut off by her parents. Am I the bad guy for telling my in-laws about my wife's adultery and abortion? Update 1. I want to thank everyone who supported what I did and those who shared their own stories. It made me feel much less alone and reassured me about my reaction. I've been dealing with the divorce process, and it's not easy. She refuses to cooperate with me and is determined to get alimony. We've been trying to reach an agreement to avoid going to court because we all know how complicated divorces can get. But it seems she's treating this as an attack on her ego, with no regard for practicality. I'm extremely glad I had the foresight to kick her out of the apartment before she had the chance to take the ultrasound documents and the pregnancy test. Now, I have them with me. I've spoken to Darren about the whole situation. Although I'm angry with him, he says he'll cooperate and even testify if necessary. He's also avoided all contact with my wife and has blocked her on every platform. He's apologized for what he did, though his apology means nothing to me. At least he's not making things worse like she did. I couldn't resist my own curiosity and asked him for details about the affair. He said it started the weekend I went to Las Vegas. It continued while he lived there, and apparently, they met up a few times after he moved. He claimed he had no idea about her pregnancy or abortion. Although I'm angry with him, I need him to act appropriately in case things escalate. I also know the only reason he's now so accommodating to my needs is that he's been financially dependent on my father since his savings ran out. My father has made it clear to both Darren and my stepmother that he will be permanently cut off if he worsens the situation in any way. My father also told me the only reason Darren isn't already cut off is that we might need him if the divorce gets messy. I'm doing my best not to lash out at him, and it hasn't been easy. No major updates for now, except that I've moved back into my apartment. I don't know exactly where she is, nor do I care. I'm glad I've owned this apartment far longer than I was married to her, so it's unlikely I'll lose it. That's all for now. I'm bracing myself for the divorce to get uglier. It's not like I have a choice. I'll try to update once things calm down a bit. Update 2. I'm officially divorced, folks. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and I've been completely tied up with everything. Since then, progress has been made with the divorce. At first, my wife continued to be difficult, but after several preliminary hearings, depositions, and mediation conferences, it became clear that taking this to trial would only end badly for her. Darren gave his deposition under oath, and we already had evidence of her pregnancy. Our lawyer backed up everything we claimed. The depositions were particularly revealing. Under oath, my wife had to answer some tough questions. Her behavior and the inconsistencies in her story only worked against her. Darren's testimony confirmed our suspicions, and while his apology meant nothing to me, it was a crucial piece of evidence. Moreover, they had foolishly taken some intimate photos during the affair that Darren still had on his phone. Denying the truth was impossible. After the depositions, we moved to mediation conferences. They were tense, but her lawyers seemed to realize that fighting for alimony was pointless, given her high salary and the solid evidence of her infidelity. It became clear that her demands for alimony wouldn't hold up in court. We were willing to settle things amicably, but I wasn't going to be taken advantage of. Finally, my wife relented. She agreed to waive any claims to alimony. The settlement also ensured she wouldn't receive any portion of my assets beyond what we agreed upon, which was fair given her contributions during our marriage. I'm relieved the final agreement was reached without the need for an unnecessary trial, which would have only drained my energy and finances. She will get her personal belongings, and we've equitably divided our shared assets. The settlement ensures that we can both move on without further complications. I'm beyond relieved that it's all over now, but I can't help feeling like this has been an enormous waste of time, not just the divorce, but the entire marriage. I can't believe I wasted my time, energy, and plans to start a family on someone who didn't hesitate to throw it all away practically for nothing. Thank you to everyone for your support and advice. It has been invaluable during this difficult time. If anyone else is going through something similar, stay strong and lean on your support system. Things will get better. Update 3. I don't know if anyone's still interested, but I posted on this subreddit earlier this year, and it's been a few months since my last update. A few hours ago, I got a call from my dad. I answered, not expecting much, but he told me something that honestly left me unsure how to react. Apparently, Darren and my ex-wife are seeing each other again. I haven't had any contact with either of them, and I didn't know Darren found a job in the city and moved here. I guess it was enough to reignite their flame, and somehow, she forgot all the insults she hurled at him during the divorce. I feel disgusted, betrayed, and like someone made a fool of me. My dad said he made it clear to both Darren and my stepmother that he doesn't want anything to do with Darren anymore. It feels good to have my dad on my side at least. Anyway, that's it. I hope I don't hear more about this, so I don't think I'll have any further updates for you. Update 4. Well, the holidays have passed and I have news about my story after seeing my family at Christmas. Specifically about my ex-wife and Darren, as both of them attended the dinner my stepmother hosted at my father's house. I had no idea they would be there, otherwise I wouldn't have even traveled. My dad didn't seem to know either, as he had made it very clear to my stepmother that he didn't want to hear anything about Darren, especially after how he reacted. To explain what happened, you need to know what my dad's house is like. It has a large entrance, but the room where we have special dinners is far from the door, so we didn't realize Darren and my ex had arrived. We were there with some uncles, cousins, and other family members for dinner when someone knocked on the door. My stepmother got up to answer it while the rest of us kept talking. Everyone's faces changed, especially mine, I've been told, when I saw them walk in. There was an awkward silence because no one knew what to say. My divorce story wasn't a secret, so I guess everyone knew what was going on. My stepmother broke the ice saying, "Look who's here." My dad, who was sitting on one of the couches, shouted, "No, not in my house. I don't want to see those two fools in my house. You'd better turn around and leave the way you came." My stepmother asked him to calm down because there were guests, but my dad told her either they left now or she could go with them when he kicked them out. Darren tried to tell my dad that wasn't the way to speak to a woman, though somewhat timidly, so I told him that sleeping with someone you consider family's wife isn't right either. My dad had already stood up, but one of my uncles held him back to prevent him from doing something he might regret. My ex-wife hadn't said anything until then, standing behind Darren, looking ashamed, so different from the face she had when she told me she got the abortion to hide her cheating. That memory made it all come rushing back. I told them both to get their cheating butts out of here now because I had no intention of spending Christmas night in a jail cell. Darren looked at me defiantly, but when I took a step forward, he backed off and started walking to the exit. My stepmother was also furious, but my dad's face was one of someone who didn't want to discuss anything further at that moment. I know some might have expected me to punch Darren or something, but all that would have gotten me was more trouble. Even though I had to hold myself back because all I wanted was to wipe that smug look off his face, it wouldn't have been worth it. After they left, my dad and stepmother didn't speak all night, and I'm not sure how their relationship stands now. My dad isn't the kind of person who tolerates nonsense, and what my stepmother did was a huge mistake. We talked the next day, just the two of us. He told me he had already cut Darren off after the divorce and wasn't giving him any more money. According to what I understood, he only gave him some financial help during the divorce to testify in my favor but cut him off afterward. Honestly, I have no words to describe how good of a father he is to me.